Chris, I don't hear you.
Thank goodness. I was like, it's just me.
Okay,
can
I
hear you,
hear
Kevin.
you.
Can you hear
Yeah,
me?
Chris, we're not
Yep.
hearing you.
How about now?
Yeah, that's even better. Man, I'm sitting there watching you talk, and I'm like, the sound's gonna come across. Wait, did I mute the wrong tab? What did I do?
Was convinced it was on my side. I thought, great, first appearance on Fabric Friday, and technical issues, and
yeah, no, that was all. So I really like this Shure microphone. It has really good sound. I absolutely hate the mute button. The mute button faces away from you, and it's just this little tiny red LED that's behind this like you can't even see if you've muted yourself. So I it's a very nice microphone, but you can't see if that just gets me because I've done full recordings where like I do like a sound test and then I like adjust the mic as I'm getting going, and then I do the video and like at the end of it there's no sound. I'm like, oh, son of a.
And it was probably a great take too.
Yep.
Right. You get to the end of the 20-minute video and there's no audio.
Right.
It's the best take ever.
Why, thank you. I'm wearing my stars and snowflakes with my stars t-shirt on.
Nice. Nice. Getting ready for Christmas. Just around the corner.
Yes. Merry Christmas, everyone.
Merry Christmas.
Yeah.
Hopefully everybody's finishing up with their shopping.
The only time you'll ever find me this quiet is when mute is
There's a reason we have a mute button. Can we get it remotely?
Well, it's great seeing everybody here. We're entering into this Christmas week. Andrew, thank you so much for joining us. This is your first time on Fabric Fridays. Why don't you introduce yourself to the group? Because I know you're world famous and everyone knows your name, but just in case someone doesn't know.
I think there's one person that might not. So.
Yes, yeah.
So I see some familiar names in the chat, but my name is Andrew Boerger. I'm in the Central Ohio area. I'm thrilled to be here. So you guys may have seen me in the chat before, but I'm a longtime viewer of Fabric Friday and enthusiastic participant in the entire Fabric and Power BI space. So I have got a small team and work out of, well, Chris, if you want, I've got a nice introductory slide. Maybe we could get there.
Let's do that.
Let's do that. I can kind of go over my background.
Oh, there we are.
So again, in the Bellefontaine, Ohio area, which is essentially in the middle of nowhere if you're in a major city, but in the broader Columbus region, work for a mid-sized automotive manufacturer. So we make automotive glass. And we are fully on that Microsoft BI stack. So Power BI since 2018, Premium since 2020. And then since Fabric has entered into public preview, we've been using it since day one. But yeah, we just eager participant in the community, have been bouncing around, attending live streams for a long time, and only this year decided it would be a good idea to try to throw my hat in the ring and try to, participate and give back and start to contribute in that way. But yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Well, Andrew, welcome to the community. We're so excited to have you. You're always welcome on Fabric Fridays. You've got, your experience, your knowledge, excited to help you facilitating in the sharing of that, because I know you have got some great insights for us. So there's actually a comment in the chat that I want us to talk about first. So Sanjay is asking, do you agree the current deployment pipelines in Fabric is a mess? Every item gets deployed without any folder structure for each items. Kevin, you said you agree?
Oh, I fully agree.
Yeah?
I mostly agree as well. There's a lot of things I wish were, folder structure would be nice. It would be nice even for little simple things like if I make a task flow in dev, I want to move that to test and prod.
Tags.
My SQL Analytics endpoint, if I create a view over a lakehouse, I want that view to move. So I'm a heavy user of deployment pipelines, so I definitely agree. There could be some improvements there.
Yeah, I did think that the folder structures are starting to move. with the deployment pipelines. Have you seen that, Andrew?
I don't use folders that often, but
Okay.
I have to check.
Yeah, because I know like doing branching out to another workspace, right? So when you're doing your feature development, the developers branch out to another workspace. The folders are definitely not brought over then, but I could have the developers deal with that. And I could have sworn if I did it move forward through a deployment pipeline. But yeah, I got to retest that. Actually, it might be today or Monday because we're fixing on moving our solution up to the next environment and build the bigger thing. So I got to decide if I'm going to do it through Git, produce another branch, and then sync that branch up, and I'd have to redo all my folder structures, or if I'm going to use deployment pipeline. So yeah, so maybe more to come on that in a week or two. But Chris, what did you think? You seem to be a little bit surprised that I thought it was a mess. You think it's in good shape?
I think it's on the journey towards the Emerald City. Right?
I agree with that statement too. It's on the journey.
Right.
And there's been a lot of enhancements, even in the last couple of months. You see all these new items being supported. So I think it's on the path.
It's on step exactly 2 rather than step 1 now. It's got a long road.
Like we spent like 5 or 6 years with almost no ability, right? And now we've got all sorts of capabilities. I literally just saw a demonstration of how you can use Terraform to deploy and manage all of your entire Fabric infrastructure yesterday because of some of the latest updates in the service. So now you can script out and dynamically deploy, manage, and through like a metadata repository all of your Fabric assets. So like this really, I mean, are there some points that still need to be addressed and but 100%, but I think we're starting to get into the we're starting to get out of the like critical gaps, and we're starting to get into the wouldn't it be nice items. And now I'm not saying that there's no critical gaps, because like I guarantee you the second I say that, there's gonna be like 4 people who are like, it doesn't do 1, 2, 3, and like, okay, 1, 2, 3, whatever. But like the big things are there. So
yeah. Well, and to me, some of it is the classic chicken and egg problem, right? So you got a lake house that you already or you have a notebook already connected to a lake house, right? And it's in the same workspace. Well, when you move it to a brand new workspace, the lake house first has to get created in order for it to know which lake house to connect to.
Yep.
So then, like, even if you do that simple thing within a deployment pipeline, you got to run your deployment pipeline twice so that you could produce the rule after that endpoint, rather than it just saying, oh, this is all in the same workspace. Why don't I just automatically do it? I think that's going to be a lot further down the road. But so we've taken like all of our notebooks. We don't save them with the lakehouse mounted to it. We mount it in code. And then this way,
that's exactly what we do.
Yeah.
That's the pattern we landed on, is don't have a default. Either you mount it or you refer to everything by the GUID in the code.
Yeah.
I like that quite a bit. And Sanjay is right. Sanjay, if you have there's a whatchamacallit, there's an ideas out there that you can go and vote for. Sanjay, I'm going to be promoting you to if you could look up, Sanjay, if you could look up that idea so that we can share that. I'm promoting you to a contributor so you can post that link in the chat. So this would be a good thing to have. Standard moderator.
Yeah, his idea on like parameters.json that we would have it. Concepts that we have in ADF, if they could bring that over, that'd be great. But on ADF on that side too, like we use it to orchestrate. We're still using a lot of data warehouses, so we use it to orchestrate stored procedures we're running in the data warehouse. Well, the same concept. We have 1 or 2 steps that goes and finds what the data warehouse name is that we want to connect to, that the stored procedures run in, and pass that through the rest of the pipeline. So again, make it as much dynamic as possible. So we'll see how it works, and we'll see what I messed up or my devs messed up during this week as we move forward. It's probably me. So
hey, there's another great comment in here, and Andrew, I'd love to get your, because you're managing a Fabric instance for a company. Aditya over on LinkedIn is asking,
Mm-hmm.
how are you measuring the ROI of the Fabric deployment over time? Do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I do. So it's always tricky to try to attribute an ROI to, even if you put out the content, and let's go back to, and let's say with Power BI, if we put out a key kind of operational or financial report and we have good results, let's say subsequent to that, it's very hard to say how much of that good result was due to the availability of the data or the report we submitted. So you kind of have to play the politics a little bit there of, hey, if we produce a solution, whether it's a central team or you're helping out an analyst who deploys the solution, and you have really good business results subsequent to that, how can you start to tie the link between the two and say that, hey, really the good result is because of what was done? But when you just talk about measuring ROI, you can also try to pick some KPIs for that. And I'll go into that a little bit with the presentation, but I would say look at really engagement metrics. So almost think of yourself as like you would if you had a SaaS application on the market or something like that. Who's engaging with it? How many daily active users, monthly active users? What's the ratio between the two? So if you have not only a group of people who's looking at that report or looking at that data every month, but they also look at it every day, that's very sticky, and that's a good indicator that it's not just a nice to have, it's probably essential to their job if they're looking at it every day. So I would say kind of define some KPIs around that they're never going to be the only thing you need to rely on, but they can usually be a good reference point to how successful you are. Just like a ordinary report, if you're putting something out there and, hey, this is a critical must-have priority for the business, you release it, it does everything that was asked for, and then 6 months later you follow up, there's no usage. We've all heard that story. So measuring usage gets you a long way to understanding if you're having an impact.
How do we do this, Andrew?
Well, I'm happy to get into that. Yeah, so
All
I got
right.
some good techniques to share. So let's go. So I've got a few slides here. I want to make sure we have lots of time for demos and looking at fun things and code that we can do. But I will go through a few slides and try to keep the pace quick here. But by all means, if I go too fast, if you guys feel, or anybody in the chat feels like I am kind of glossing over something, please call that out and I will be happy to pause and answer. But for now, I'll go through a few of these slides and we will go from there. Disclaimers, I am just a humble admin. I don't have any insider knowledge. I don't have any grand coding or developer background. I came at this from a complete Power BI perspective, again, in the last 4 years, and have used most of the built-in monitoring capabilities of the product, have used or at least looked at most of the third-party solutions that I'm aware of that are out there. And then ultimately we kind of decided that in order to do the monitoring and administrative kind of overhead that we actually wanted to do and look at some of these engagement metrics, we were going to have to kind of roll our own solution. And with Fabric, I think there's a lot of really interesting opportunities to do that. But again, that's my disclaimer that I'm not telling you what to do. I'm going to tell you what we are doing and what has worked for us and some suggestions of things to look at. I'm not saying that what we do is the best by any means. And there's a lot of different ways to attack this. So one thing I'll call out here is that if you're trying to monitor your Power BI and Fabric tenant and you're wanting to do custom monitoring, I would say the first thing you should ask yourself is, do we even need to do custom monitoring? Can we just get a third-party solution? Can we work with what's available out of the box? And you may find that you don't need to build anything at all.
That's a great comment, Andrew. Like, there is additional effort and expense that goes along with building those custom solutions.
Yep.
we know, we've seen this from Microsoft and the Fabric team, that they're aggressively working on evolving and improving that UI and that monitoring capabilities. So like keeping abreast of that and understanding what's coming, that may solve a lot of the challenges for many organizations, because hey, this is perfectly fine, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say the out of the box capabilities are in a much better place than they were even a year ago. So when Fabric went into public preview, one of the things that came along with that was the admin workspace, which has some
Mhm.
basic like tenant inventory. It's got some basic usage statistics for the last 30 days. And I mean, those are kind of just out of the box semantic models. You can build your own reporting if you're not satisfied with what Microsoft has given you. Connect to the model. Again, the main limitation you're going to run into is usually just like the APIs, you're going to have some type of window of time in the past. So you're going to have 30 days of activity and no more. I think we may see some of that change in the coming year. I think there's a strategy around making more of your data available in the real time hub for Fabric itself. So that's one thing I want to make sure we show is one thing that's happened in the last few months is we have these new data sources lighting up in the real time hub. For example, job events, I think so. Capacity events maybe is coming or it's on the roadmap, but I think it lit up and maybe is not fully available yet. But being able to take your capacity utilization and your CUs and kind of retain that data forever, in a lake
Mm.
house. Your job events. So one thing that I'm eagerly awaiting is the ability to uh, take all of our job events for an entire capacity, retain those in a lake house, and then look at long-term trends of, hey, this data flow is taking 10% longer to run each month, and doing more analysis of that nature. Um,
Isn't some of that at the workspace level now with the new
yeah, so
workspace
the
thing?
the job events, so they and also with KQL and Kusto is they're releasing some abilities to set up workspace monitoring and save really detailed logs that even include, from what I understand, like DAX execution timings and things like that. Save it all to a event house, I believe, for
Yeah.
the workspace. And they did confirm. I did see some confirmation that they're working on making that available for the entire capacity. I think it's by capacity, not by tenant, which would be fantastic. Because for me, it's very interesting, but it's a limited usage. If we have hundreds of workspaces, we really want to get a handle on everything at once. So a lot of these new sources, whether it's job events or capacity events or activity events, and this new detailed workspace monitoring, really need that to be at the capacity level, in my opinion, to be useful. But for now, you can
Yeah.
go by artifact and you can start to capture your job logs.
Nice.
But to continue here, so the main things that we want to monitor: usage, inventory, capacity, and then if you have particular compliance. So you may have compliance requirements around access. So a really common thing, whether it's your internal IT controls or some type of external regulatory framework, you may need to answer questions like who has access to a certain piece of content. Maybe you need to list your deployments. You need to do certain things around that. But this is kind of the four categories I break down monitoring into. And again, we're really trying to improve our users' experience here. This isn't about governance for the sake of governance. We're trying to improve things. And I'll go through 3 sessions and then we'll get onto the demos because I want to have time for that. But some examples of you may start out with your Power BI or Fabric deployment and you're not thinking about this. You're trying to deliver value. You're trying to get solutions out there. And that's a fine way to begin. But eventually you're going to have scenarios like this that happen where you get a call from an executive and they say, hey, I want to make sure these reports are being used. Can you tell me that? Can you show me how often these are being viewed and by whom? So that's one scenario. Um, you may get the dreaded capacity usage email where, capacity's at 100%, you're being throttled. What happened? Where you better be able to understand the capacity metrics app, get in there and break down um, exactly what workspaces and what artifacts are contributing to that. And this is really important because I think anybody who's working heavily with Fabric knows you need to watch that background usage, or you could easily find yourself in a situation where you're throttled for potentially a few hours, right? And if you don't have auto scale turned on, you really need to be careful of that.
Hey, Andrew, quick question for you.
Yeah.
This came over from LinkedIn. Brandy's asking, do you use any automated or AI process mining around building better monitoring and compliance?
Automated, absolutely. I'm not doing any type of AI process mining.
Mhm.
It's mostly just driven by some of the reporting and the insights we get based on that of what's being used and by whom. But I think our data is of good quality now that we could potentially look at that, in 2025 of could you do process mining on top of this data and get some insights that way? But no, not at this time.
That's it. And that's great. I mean, that also talks about the value of implementing this sooner than later, so you can
Yep.
build out good quality data, so you can
Yeah.
do that data mining, right?
And that's a really good point, is that if you take away nothing else from this session, I'm going to go through two of the most important data sources that you can get today, and start to retain these, because the main limitation, Microsoft makes all of these wonderful APIs available, and usually the main limitation you're going to run into is you can only go back so far, typically
Mhm.
30 days for activity events. I think maybe I've heard that Office 365 admins can go back 90 days, but I think that's through a separate portal and maybe separate API calls. But if nothing else, when I get to the activity events section, start to retain your audit logs. And even if you don't know exactly what you're going to do with them yet, we're going to start doing metadata scanning, start retaining those activity events. And then later, you'll have that full history instead of being kind of handicapped to only looking back a few weeks. You'll be able to see those long-term trends.
Yeah, good advice.
Um,
Smart.
and And then other scenarios here, you may have a lot of pro licenses. So we came from an environment where we started with issuing pro licenses and then went to premium, went to fabric later. So it's time at that point to evaluate, are the licensees of pro actually using those pro features, right? And you can get this from your activity events. So if you look at, there's a schema out there Microsoft has for activity events that lists all the different operations that can happen within a Fabric tenant, and you can start to identify, okay, these are the operations that somebody needs to have pro in order to do things like publishing or any activities within a shared workspace at more of the contributor or owner level. And if you're starting to retain that, then you can say, hey, we have all these pro licenses. Are these people even using operations that require a pro license, or are they just viewing reports? And you can start to audit your licensing that way. And then, you get these questions around, maybe you have import models, maybe you have certain teams that are pushing to have those refreshed more often. Again, if you don't have good usage data, how can you really determine if that's a valid request? This is something we get to a lot because, everybody loves the phrase real time. There's a lot of good cases for real time, especially in a manufacturing environment where, hey, we need to know how the shift did when the shift ends. Or, hey, we need to do some type of process during financial close and we want to have these reports for reference, and they need to be pretty up to date to what's happening in the source data, versus, hey, we use this to produce a monthly slide deck. Hey, you don't actually need that to refresh every half hour, right? So your usage patterns are critical there.
On
And
that
then
manufacturing part, right?
yep.
Some of it is as well getting the right culture built, because I've seen places where they go, can you email me that report X number of times a day, right?
Yeah.
And you don't even know if they're using it. But if you could change the culture a little bit to say, okay, you could go here very easily to see it, and then your monitoring will pick it up that they actually are doing it. And if your manufacturing managers are not looking at it at the end of shift, you could come back and report on that as well, because you have them coming to a trackable location.
Exactly. Yeah. And from the culture point of view, you want as much activity as possible to be coming from the service so you can actually see and make those decisions about, you don't want things to be invisible, right? If you have an export that's going out, if you have the export happens, let's say one person exports to Excel and then they produce something offline that's being used by dozens of people. If you're doing that, it's very hard to audit versus if everybody's going to the service to view the report.
Mhm.
Unless they're using Excel as their source for their Power BI.
True. If they're using Analyze in Excel, you can capture that, which is a great point.
Mhm.
Or no, like inversely, like you can look through these logs and see how many reports source data from Excel.
Yes, yeah, you could get lineage and you could say, hey, we've got this file out here in SharePoint, this Excel file, and it's being relied on by all of this content.
Right. And
That's a
and
good point.
that really allows you to do targeted investments of and reach outs to say, hey, Tim, you've created this report that over 300 people use every single month, and it's coming from
Mhm.
this Excel file. Let's talk about that. How can we get that Excel file or that source, or how can we, bring that out of the shadows and into the, out of shadow IT and into like the
Yep.
actual like process, that
And
type.
we've used this for that exact scenario where maybe you need to look at, I think on the Power BI adoption roadmap, there was this great section around when you talk about managed self-service BI, there's this idea of you may have handovers where maybe somebody from the business has created a solution that has a lot of value, but
Mhm.
it starts to get so widely adopted and so um, critical that it's really time to look at the back end and make sure that things are in the right place. They're adhering to best
Mhm.
practices. Hey, maybe they built this on top of an Excel export from SAP, and hey, we need to get rid of that and let's just do a direct connection to our data warehouse for our SAP data and start to see the visibility of hey, something is growing in popularity. Can we jump in there and make it a better solution?
Yeah, and I guess I toss it. Look for some insights for you. What's the most interesting thing you've been able to uncover going through these logs, going through this information? Uh,
Yeah, I've got a good example. So one thing you might notice is we had a digital signage application, right? So we're a manufacturing environment. So we had a third party application that would load Power BI content to televisions, and we had these deployed everywhere. And we had a service account that would do the viewing, so we could easily filter that out from a monitoring perspective, and we could say, okay, these are our digital signage users, and that's where that's coming from. Well, somebody had gone in and they were creating these digital signage screens and connecting to Power BI content, but they were doing everything with their own personal account for authentication. So suddenly
Mm.
we see this user has thousands of views per day of all these, a small amount of reports, but it's like you viewed this 10,000 times, not in a single day you didn't. So then
Right.
just small that around, hey, let's make sure we're using the service account for the signage. Um, Always good to see exports to Excel. So that's something we can capture of if we have a report and we really think that the report should be pretty much everything that's needed, yet you still see a lot of export activity on a report that necessarily wasn't designed for export. That's another indicator that you may need to go back and talk to your users and see where the report is falling short. Because in my opinion, there's nothing wrong with export as long as you're planning for that and you've designed for that and you understand why you might want to export. But if you have something that you think is a complete solution and you're still seeing the exports, it may be a limitation of what's been built.
Sure. Have you ever heard of the tool called Gatlin? Gatlin? Yeah, Gatlin.
Mm.
No, I haven't.
It's a testing tool used to test performance on like cloud scale apps to ensure that they're responding and that they keep responding, all the time, and allows like an app developer to like detect when an app goes down or if there's ever any performance issues. I had a developer who set up Gatlin to run against their Power BI reports, to ensure that everything was kept in hot cache, so that at no
Huh.
point in time was there even the slightest bit of a cold cache warming
Hmm.
for users. And so Gatlin, it was a user's access. They were using their ID, and so they were having over 10,000 hits every day on all of their reports. It was like,
Mm.
this report
Yep.
is brand new. You rolled it out 3 days ago. How do you have 10,000 views a day every day for
Right.
the last month? You know, like we could literally see the day they implemented the tests, because they went from like, you know, 1 or 2 views, you know, as they were in testing, to, you know, 400 views one day and then 10,000 views plus every single day after that. So
Look how popular my report is. I deserve a raise.
Yeah, there you go. Laundering the metrics there. But
Yeah.
it's normal to have these automation accounts, but that's why if you're monitoring, you can start to kind of partition those away and say, hey, these
Right.
accounts are automated. They're some type of non-human account, and you can start to quarantine those and look at your metrics with all that type of activity excluded. But
I would also say though, like while some monitoring is good and works, you have to walk like a real tight line with that, especially on the front end of Power BI, because there's a lot of potential consumption conflicts that you can create with something like that. Because, like, okay, hey, let's say your reports are going to naturally get between 100 and 150 users a day, which is a very healthy report, right? That's a
yeah,
good report that in utilization. If you add 10,000 hits on top of that, you've just basically, you know, your usage of CUs, and thus how much you're spending, is
Mhm.
now 500 times what it should be. And the question is, should you really be incurring that cost as part of your solution? You know, some of that, okay, but like go in with your eyes open as to what these solutions cost and what they do.
yeah, absolutely. With that, I would love to get into some demos here. I've
Yeah,
got a
let's
lot of
do
good
it.
content to
Holy
share.
cow, look at this.
So we got and I wanted to call out a few things in chat. There was some reference to the Fabric capacity monitoring from William Krager. That's a great solution. And then when you start looking at Power BI and Fabric monitoring, in our experience, there was a lot of things out there that people had put together solutions that relied on PowerShell, on Power Automate, on different calls, and even Power Query, of going out and collecting these API data sources and retaining them somehow. From our perspective, all those were great. And then, of course, there's third-party paid solutions that do that. But when Fabric came out, it was this idea of, we have notebooks now, we have lakehouses. I want all my monitoring to take place within Fabric, right? From a solution architecture,
Mhm.
I don't want to have to. I don't want to have a VM running scheduled PowerShell scripts. I don't want to have all this other things. I just want it to be kind of within a Fabric workspace. Let's do some monitoring. So let me explain what's going on here. So within this workspace, uh, this is kind of the solution architecture and what I'd recommend if you're trying to get started with collecting all of your capacity and tenant metadata. The most important things, in my opinion, you can collect are your activity events, which is more or less a continuous table of all of the audit logs and activities that are happening within Fabric. You've got metadata scanning, which is a process that goes into each and every workspace that you have access to, um, and will do a full scan of the contents of that workspace. And this is so powerful because it returns just about everything you could be interested in with a single process, meaning I don't have to go and use a function or an API to scan the workspace itself, and then one
Mm,
for data sets, and then one for
mm,
reports, and then one for access.
Mhm.
Metadata scanning will come back with a nice JSON return that gives me everything, and I'll
mm.
show what that looks like. But this is a little bit more work up front to get set up, but it's absolutely worth it because you can start to run these scans each day. This supports incremental processing, so you can scan only the workspaces that have changed in some way since the last scan. And you can get everything from user access, you can get lineage, you can get DAX and M expressions. So you can use this to build out a full feature data catalog, um, in addition to just kind of getting certain metadata. And then I would say there was a question in chat around semantic link and semantic link labs. I want to show that in the demos because there's a lot of really outstanding features coming to that tool, and it's making this entire process way simpler to set up. And then this last one here, we have the best practice analyzer. So before, you could always run BPA. For anybody who doesn't know, best practice analyzer is a tool that lets you apply a list of rules. These can be custom rules, or there's an out-of-the-box list of best practices, and you apply those to a semantic model, and you see where the violations are, and you can kind of score the model on how many best practices are being adhered to. Well, now with Semantic Link, you can run a BPA scan against a list of workspaces. So I could scan every single workspace in my environment, and see what models are not adhering to my BPA rules. You can define custom rules, but before, this is something that you had to kind of do one by one. So maybe you would use Tabular Editor and you would open up the model and run BPA. Now this can be something that is kind of a proactive scan that's happening across the whole environment.
So that's interesting, because I was wondering why you would have had it here in the same cadence as your other things. But what you're trying to find is like, you as the more pro, Power BI Fabric person, you're probably also going to do that like during the deployment, right?
Correct.
For your models. But doing it here on this cadence, let's say this is daily or whatever, what you're trying to find is the people that are, also doing some development, but they're not as pro as you, so that
That's
you
exactly
could try
it.
to, and then you find these things, and you could talk to them. That's a good
That's
idea.
great.
You can mash that up
Mhm.
against the performance metrics and utilization. So you could
Mhm.
say, okay, maybe I have 10,000 really bad models, but I don't care about 9,998 of them because they get
Mhm.
almost no usage.
Yep.
These two really bad models are used by like 500 people a day. So I'm going to reach out and engage and help fix those two models, or work with that team to get that up and running. Oh, that is
That's exactly what we'd use it for. Because to Kevin's point, if you're in that managed self-service world, maybe you have a central team. So that this is our structure for context: is we've got a central team, and we're going to be running BPA before we ever publish to production. We're going to be kind of fixing those issues as they come up. But we have analysts, we have other kind of self-service, we have business users who may be developing as well. We're not necessarily going to that level of oversight. They're not going to be deploying with the same tools that we do. Not everybody has Tabular Editor. So we want to be able to scan everything and see, okay, we know the things we publish are generally going to have a low amount of violations, but what are these other things in the environment that maybe it's, to go back to the example, we have something that's skyrocketing in popularity, but there's some really critical violations that are either going to cause performance issues, or potentially there's duplicate measures with other models, or any number of things.
oh my gosh. I think
Yeah.
about this and
Shut up and take my money.
Okay, let's get into it. So this is the overall architecture. The idea is you're going to go out to all these different APIs, call them, get the results, save them to a lakehouse. And then from there, it's kind of up to you of how you want to build this. I'll show some examples of the reason I say it's up to you is, if you're building custom anything, it's going to be because you have particular areas that you're focusing on. For us, the areas we wanted to focus on was really user access, activity logs, and the tenant inventory. Somebody else may be very interested in capacity utilization. Somebody else may be very interested in, let's say, performance of queries and looking at things like that. That's not what this solution in particular focuses on. I would have gone maybe a slightly different route, or done things differently if I was mostly interested in the performance monitoring. And in any case, I think with the things that we're seeing from the real-time hub, that stuff is going to become a lot easier to just do out of the box. But let's go into some notebooks here, and I will show. Let's look at our activity events. And I'm going to share a GitHub repository where I have sample code for all of this, if somebody wants to get started with collecting their tenant metadata. And then I'll show how actually with Semantic Link Labs, this entire process is becoming much, much easier. So if you want to collect activity events, I promise it's not so bad, right? I'm not a professional developer. I'm not a Python expert, and you can get started with this stuff, especially if you have a reference script to start with, and you can really do a lot with a small amount of code. So to explain what's going on here, you need to authenticate in some form. Semantic Link Labs makes this much easier, but for this example, we built all of this over a year ago before Semantic Link Labs had really gotten into the activity events and the API wrappers for these types of calls. So what we're doing here is we're just authenticating. We go in, you can either grab a defined range of dates. Again, you're going to be limited to 30 days back. So you can either go back and specify for the first time, collect your last 30 days of activity logs, or if you're going to run this every night, you may go back only one day and just capture the last day of logs. But it's very simple. It's just you hit the URL and you pass in a filter. So you would say, I want to capture logs from this date to that date. And you'll get back a data frame that has all of your events. And this is really the heart of the script. It's only about 50 lines of code. And this is going to give me all of my events for the last day. And depending on the size of your environment, this could be, it really depends on how much data this is going to come back with. For us, with Fabric, honestly, the amount of events has kind of skyrocketed. So you may see hundreds of thousands of events per day. Whereas if you just had a Power BI premium environment, maybe you're looking at only a few tens of thousands for, let's say, a P1 or F64 type of environment.
Hey, Andrew, a quick question for you. I know in the past there were limits on the APIs, and extracting hundreds of thousands of records were a real challenge. Does this notebook handle those limitations? Or did they remove those limitations and I missed it?
So there's a few things in here, as we look through these notebooks, where you have to be mindful of those rate limits. That's not something we actually hit very often. I know with the workspace and metadata scanning, you really need to batch that and be careful of the concurrency. So we only scan, let's say, 25 workspaces at a time. And there's different ways you could do that in parallel, and you could have multiple scans happening at the same time. But I'll say we're not large enough that we've encountered any type of throttling or rate limits when we do this type of operation. So maybe those limits were a little more harsh in the past, but just in an ordinary type of nightly scan where we get all of our activity events, all of our inventory, scan BPA, we haven't run into any type of limitation there.
All right, good. That's awesome.
So this is I'll say the hard example where this is doing things the hard way. And I'll show this for metadata scanning as well. And then I'll show with Semantic Link Labs how they are making this entire process so much easier. So that's the activity events. And again, if nothing else, start to collect this as soon as you can, because a year from now, you'll be so happy you did when you can go back and look at your trends for the entire year. And you can see a full history of everything that's happened. And if you have any type of compliance or audit requirements, they're going to love you for having this data.
Yeah. Please note, you're going to start pulling this data out. Then you're going to start building reports on this.
Yep.
When you build your reports, do not design them for what they look like with the amount of data you have today. Think about what it's going to look like with 3 years of data in it, and design your reports with that in mind. Because on day one, you're going to have 1 day of data. Day 2 is 2 days, right? Like, don't think broader and bigger, because I can't tell you how many reports I've seen where they're like, it doesn't look great, and it's clear. If you look at the reports, you're like, oh, they built it on day 4 of having data from these systems, and they've not revisited it, so that's why it looks like this. And so just be
and with activity events in particular, just keep in mind that depending on the size of your environment, if that's going to be your fact table, let's say you build this into a nice star schema as we have, and you're going to have activity events as one of the main facts. If you're not going to aggregate that, keep in mind that could be potentially millions and millions of records per year, and you may want that. I know we certainly do. If we haven't gotten to the point where we have to start to aggregate, but just be mindful that that's potentially a huge model. And this is the metadata scanning. So this one I'll show the before and after. So in this notebook, we are basically mounting a lake house. We're going after metadata scan, and there's a wonderful article on the in the Learn documents that goes into running metadata scanning. I just want to briefly show this because this has a full instruction for how you utilize these 4 different APIs to get your full metadata scan. And this is really the way to go. Is I would recommend, don't just go in and I run the data set, the semantic model API, the report API, the access API. Don't do that. Run your metadata scan, get everything at once, and then parse that out later. And then this gives you a nice JSON object. So as Microsoft starts to introduce, let's say, new like tags, for example, I assume at some point the new tag feature is going to end up in the metadata scan, and we're going to get a nice array of all the tags for the object. If you're running the scan in this format, you don't have to worry about schema or anything. You're just going to get everything that you could possibly collect and keep it. So to go back to this, so this, again, I'll provide the code, but what we're doing is we're triggering a full scan. We're doing this in chunks. So if you have a large environment, you need to process only a certain amount of workspaces at a time, especially if you're using all these options. So we're using every single option. So we're using our get lineage is true. We're getting all of our data set details is true. The data set schema is true. And the expressions is true, and the users. So we're getting every piece of information that Microsoft will give us, and we loop through and retain this. And if you're scanning the entire environment, like for us, I think this takes about half an hour to go through for us if we're doing everything. For the mileage may vary. If you have a small environment, maybe less. And if you're doing this incrementally, and each night you're only getting the workspaces that have changed, it could be quite fast. But here's an example of we keep talking about semantic link labs. This, again, is the hard way. This is me just going out and manually connecting to the API and pulling all this data with Python. Now with semantic link, as of maybe a week or 2 ago, what Michael Kowalski's included is there's a wrapper function for the scanner API. So now if you just simply install semantic link labs, import what you need, this cell is doing the same thing as all the code I just showed before, where it's going in and scanning the workspaces. Oh yeah, you set the same option, and now I've abstracted all that complexity of, now it's a simple call. I call this and I save the scan results, and it gives me back, if you want to see what those scan results look like, here it is. It's a JSON return, and you're going to save this away, and then you can start to parse this in a notebook, and you can build out your fact tables for all the different dimensions. And this has everything, right? This has lineage, all the IDs. If you have endorsements, you can start to do reporting by certification status, the amount of people in groups that have access. It has absolutely everything you could possibly want about your tenant. But yeah, look at Semantic Link Labs, because they're really making this so much more accessible and simple. And I would say if we had built this, because again, we built this shortly after Fabric came out, kind of as a good use case of notebooks and lake houses and just learning the environment. If we were starting this project today, I would be relying probably more heavily on Semantic Link Labs and some of these functions, because it makes things so easy.
That's probably this is probably a great project to learn Semantic Link Labs. Yep. And about all of the capacities inside of Fabric, what's going on in Fabric.
That's exactly how we treated it. Was Fabric came out, and we wanted to really get in there and start to use notebooks, start to use lake houses, really get a feel for what it takes to build a medallion and start to learn these concepts. Yeah, you can start with something from the business side, but if you're just doing this as a pure technical learning exercise, using your monitoring data is a great way to begin that. At least it was for us, right? Is we can kind of we can build a solution that we're going to use, and we can learn Fabric at the same time.
Yeah, I love that, because you're in control. You're not going to be working under an artificial deadline or straight up a business deadline for delivery. So you've got time and room to explore. Yet it's something that's really important for IT and for you managing the environment. This is awesome. Hey, Andrew, we've only got about 10 minutes left.
Okay.
If there was one thing or one little demo or piece that you wanted to like hone in on, because I believe you have about 4 hours of presentation left.
I do, absolutely.
Yeah. So if there's one thing we could go over to, what do you think would be most insightful or interesting?
I'll do a brief demo of some of the reporting we've done on top of this. So
Cool.
just to skim over the best practice analyzer, again, using semantic link labs. I'll skip over the functions here, tenant settings. You can do all these great things. So again, best practice analyzer used to be something that you really needed to be using tabular editor to do effectively. Yes, there's kind of other ways to do it, but now we can go in with semantic link and run BPA either for a single model. So I'm scanning a single data set here and I get this nice HTML return that has all of my violations. Or you can run this and you can scan everything in the environment, like I mentioned. So I pass in a list of all of my workspaces for the capacity. I exclude certain models that for whatever reason I don't want to scan. And then right out of the box, what you can do is Semantic Link Labs will create the model for you. So it'll save all the results to a lakehouse table called BPA results. Yep. So what this is doing, it saves all of the violations down to this Delta table, and then it will create automatically a model over top of the table, and then it will create a report over top of that. So
It's
now,
amazing.
just without, I didn't have to create this. I'll show you the one that I created, but you can go in and you can start to look at all of the different violations across the entire environment. I'm showing some IDs where you would probably show the names here just for the sake of this is a real scan. So you can start to look at your violations. And then the whole point of having this done custom is you have the data saved and retained. You could start to look at scan over scan. Let's say you do a scan every week. You can see, are the violations going up? Are they going down? Where are we making progress? And then you can do, completely customized reporting that looks any way you want it to. You don't have to rely on just the out of the box ones. So we do different BPA reports. And then again, I want to show also with the usage statistics what that can look like when you start to really get a nice solution built out there. I'm using so some of the stuff. If anybody is on LinkedIn and you see all the different visualization gurus out there, I'm taking some inspiration here. So these KPI cards at the top are not my design. This is something I got from Gustav Dudek, I believe, his credit for these. And these are fantastic, but you can start to look at your metrics over time. So I can look at year to date for a capacity, my users, my daily users, how many views, how many distinct reports were viewed, my exports to Excel, are they up or down? And then you can start to cross-reference things. So at the bottom left here, I've got report details. At the bottom right, I've got user details, and you can start to do some cross-filtering. So again, I'm just showing IDs instead of the names here. But if I just select this report, it's going to cross-filter and tell me what the activity for this report was, who are my top users.
Oh, and look
Nice.
at that. You could see, like, what was that, about a month ago or no, 3 months ago, usage really picked up on it on report views. So
yeah, so we can see that this one picked up. But in August it started to really get a lot more consistent usage. And then again, with user details, you can start to put all kinds of KPIs together. So something that you can look at is like the last view. So how many days has it been since this user viewed this report? And you can make all this dynamic. You can have, all these are measures, so it's fully dynamic. If I don't select anything, then I'm going to get the last view date of that user for any report.
Okay.
But there's all kinds of things you can do, right? And it would take us hours to go through everything. But again, if you leave this with only one lesson, is start collecting your activity events, start scanning your workspaces, save that and do whatever you want with it, because you will have ideas and you can go in any number of directions. You could do full lineage reporting, any number of things.
And you're going to share your GitHub to help make it easy for everybody, right?
I will. So what I'm going to do is
you put it into our private chat area.
I will, yeah. So I will paste the GitHub link, and I'm actively adding to this. So right now, I know I have some new content just since Ignite that I need to update the add in some more sample notebooks to that.
That'd be great if you could share that with us. We'll get that out into the live stream. We'll make sure people have access to it. This is just a brilliant topic. So okay, let me copy that. Copy link. Paste. There you go. That is now in the chat. You can see that there. So Andrew, this is absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much for coming on and joining us today. Before we do our closeouts, I do want to do just a little bit of a plug for. We've got a brand new series called Working with Data that we're kicking off. Our first episode is going to be out on December 24th. The first one's going to be featuring Miguel Myers. This is going to be long form content. Look for 90 plus minutes in the first episode where we actually go through and see how Miguel Myers designs amazing Power BI reports and how he takes inspiration and like his entire process. And we're going to go through step by step, and we're going to be having a great conversation along the way. So do check out the live stream, or I'm sorry, it's not a live stream, but it is a video. The next one might even be 2+ hours because we've had conversations on it. It should be a really good time. All right. So do check that out, and looking forward to it.
December 24th, unless you're a member, then you get it early.
Kevin, you're spot on.
I pay attention.
Yeah,
sometimes.
thank you. Yes, if you want to watch it now, for as little as $5 a month, you can become a member of the channel, and you can get access to that content right now and early access to all the videos. So, but everything it's really to support the channel. So it will be out there, so don't worry about it. So Fernando, it will come out. You don't have to be a member. But I will say, we're through enough of the art design process. I'll even announce this here. We have a new perk I'm announcing. Should have actual samples of this relatively soon. But if you become a member of the channel and at the chosen level, you'll get your name on our credits list, as well as a custom chosen artwork of yourself, so profile image and stuff so that you can put that as your own like icon or whatnot, and share that out and show that you're a chosen member on Kratos BI. So lots of good stuff coming up. Awesome. With that, you know what, Kevin or Andrew, what parting words would you have for this group?
I think this is a really exciting time for admin monitoring. I mean, not only with the third-party tools, but what you can do just within Fabric itself, not having to leave anywhere. I think watch the space. There's going to be some awesome things coming to the real-time hub that we can see on the roadmap. And some of the stuff is just going to get easier over time. So check out Semantic Link Labs and check out your tenant audit logs and metadata. I think you will find a use for it, certainly.
Awesome.
Definitely. And invest in your own environment like you invest in your business users, right?
Absolutely.
Maybe not as much investment, but you have to know all this stuff. Great job, Andrew. Thank you so much.
Yeah, well done.
Thanks
sir.
for having me, guys.
Yep, our pleasure. With that, hey everyone, Merry Christmas to you. We hope you have an incredible holidays, a happy New Year. Kevin and I are going to be back next week on the 27th. We're going to be doing our year in review session. So we're going to be talking about the latest and all of the great things that came out in Fabric this year. So join us next Friday on Fabric Fridays. All right.
Sounds good. Look forward to being here.
Thank
all
you
right.
guys so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Peace.
Combine strategic industry insight and advanced technical expertise to uncover and solve your digital transformation challenges. If you're interested in learning more, check out our website at bakertilly.com/digital.